Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear students, my name is Harald Badinger. I'm Vice Rector for Financial Affairs, and on behalf of WU Rectors Council, I would like to welcome you all to today's edition of the event series WU Matters, WU Talks. The event series WU Matters, WU Talks has been in existence for some 8 years now, and with more than 140 events, it is part of a variety of measures through which WU fulfills its third mission, alongside research and teaching, known as third mission, making socially and economically relevant topics accessible to the interested public, among others. Each of the 11 departments of WU organizes one of these event evenings throughout the year, and today it is the Department of Global Business and Trade, specifically the Institute for Responsibility and Sustainability in Global Business, that has taken over the design of the program, which deals with the topic purpose and profit. Increasingly, stakeholders are demanding that companies pursue a higher purpose that goes beyond profits or shareholder or stakeholder value. Research suggests that companies with purpose central to their strategy tend to have higher growth and profitability, whilst achieving higher levels of employee engagement and satisfaction, which raises some key questions. Most fundamentally, what is purpose? And then, of course, how do and can companies develop a purpose-driven organization? Today's WU Matters explores these questions: corporate purpose, the governance of purpose, and how companies can authentically develop purpose-driven organizations in a complex and dynamic world. It starts off with a keynote lecture by Günter Stahl, Professor of International Business at WU, and will then be continued with a panel discussion of experts in the field, which will be moderated by Wendy Chappell, Professor of International Business and CSR at WU. Yeah, and you came not here to see me, you came here to see the experts, and I would like to directly hand over the word to Günter Stahl. Please.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much, Harald, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to say a few welcome words. I see some familiar faces here and many new ones. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Günter Stahl. I'm head of the Institute for Responsibility and Sustainability in Global Business. And I'm delighted to be here this evening and to welcome you to this WU Matters event on how to build a successful purpose-driven organization, which is not an easy feat, as some of you might have experienced. Can I just ask, how many of you work for a purpose-driven company or have done internships at purpose-driven companies? Please raise your hands. Okay, a relatively small group. Now, we don't have the time, but I'd be curious, what these companies are. But yesterday I asked a new student assistant at our institute. She did an internship at Red Bull, and she's interested in purpose, and she said Red Bull for her is a purpose-driven company. Question mark, I don't want to get into this, but again, building such a company is not an easy thing to do because it requires instilling a sense of purpose throughout the organization at every level, from the senior management team. And this is usually the easy thing, right? So creating consensus within the top management team, but then you have to really instill it down to the frontline employees and also get buy-in from external stakeholders. And basically this is the focus of today's panel discussion. So as you can see, we have, so Nina is still here on the picture, an exceptional group of panelists lined up. One of them, unfortunately, had to cancel. Nina Poxleitner, she was supposed to represent the non-profit perspective here, and I see some disappointed faces here, but we have 3 excellent panelists. But before I give the floor to our 3 speakers and my colleague, Professor Wendy Chappell, who will facilitate the panel discussion, let me take just a few minutes to make some reflections on the theme of today's WU Matters event, purpose and profit. I mean, we all know what profit is, no explanation required, but Vice-Rector Bardinger just raised the question, what is purpose really, right? You know, purpose is one of those buzzwords that are constantly thrown around in business school classrooms or corporate boardrooms, or WU Matters event, for that matter. But it's actually, the concept is very hard to pin down. It's ill-defined, and Professor Miska will later probably say a few words about that, how it's defined in academia. I also want to talk briefly about what it means to be a purpose-driven organization, because there are many myths and misconceptions about purpose and what it means really to be such an organization. Now, one of these misconceptions is that being purpose-driven, positioning an organization as a force for good, is something that is universally seen as positive, as desirable. I mean, we like to think that, right, and almost take it for granted that this is something that is well received by society. You know, for example, if companies commit themselves to, you know, engaging with the SDGs, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or engage in ESG activities. But as you know, there's a fair amount of backlash among some segments of society and some politicians, especially in the United States, but not only in the United States. And I fear that there's a slight change in climate also in some European countries, and even in companies that have succeeded in becoming sustainability leaders in their industries. These efforts were often met with some degree of skepticism, even resistance on the part of stakeholders, the employees, the customers, of course also shareholders, investors, who needed to be convinced that you know, business as usual is no longer an option in today's world. And we will later have a speaker, Lothar Wenzel, who will share some of the insights from his consulting work on how to instill purpose in a company and integrate it into the company's activities, but equally important, how to get buy-in from both internal and external stakeholders. Now, another misconception is that a purpose-driven organization is a specific legal form or something that requires certification. Some companies have adopted so-called profit with purpose business models or other legal forms that require an explicit commitment to a higher purpose within the bylaws. An well-known example is Danone, the world's largest listed company that has adopted the legal framework of a profit with purpose corporation. And Professor Segrestin, one of our speakers, is one of the leading authorities actually in the field, and she and her team were also one of the driving forces behind the introduction of this legal form in France, and she will later talk about her experiences. Or another well-known example is Patagonia, right? The garment brand that uses 100% organic cotton and discourages consumers from buying their products because, part of Patagonia's mission is to promote responsible consumption, one of the SDGs. And Patagonia is a certified B Corporation. Is that right? I think it is, right? But many socially driven companies, I would think the large majority are actually not. They have not adopted one of these new legal forms. Probably the best known example, and I apologize for boring some of you if you're very familiar with that because you had it in your teaching cases, for instance, is Unilever, whose former chief executive, Paul Polman, was one of the first corporate leaders who argued that large multinationals like Patagonia have a key role to play in addressing climate change and other grand challenges. Paul Polman gave a remarkable speech at the World Economic Forum some years ago, where he said that companies like Unilever can no longer be a bystander and pretend that these global problems do not exist, right? So large corporations are part of society. And he argued that companies like Unilever are uniquely positioned to tackle some of the grand societal challenges like fighting poverty, climate change, and so on. Now, what all these companies have in common, regardless of the legal form, is that they are pursuing a higher purpose that goes beyond making profits, beyond maximizing shareholder value, and that they have integrated this broader social mission or environmental concerns into their business model. And they do it not for altruistic reasons or for ethical reasons, although that's certainly part of the motivation for many of these business leaders, but they also do it because it makes a lot of business sense, right? And because stakeholders demand it, as Paul Polman has repeatedly pointed out, for instance, when he said that if we focus our company on improving the lives of the world's citizens and come up with genuine, sustainable solutions, we are more in sync with consumers and society, and ultimately this will result in good shareholder returns. Which brings me to another misconception, namely the notion that purpose-driven means no profit. As the Unilever example illustrates, purpose-driven organizations are not opposed to making profit. Quite the opposite. They understand that making profits and delivering shareholder value is absolutely necessary for fulfilling their deeper purpose. You can't do that unless you are highly profitable, right? In fact, this is a lesson that some CEOs had to learn the hard way. For example, Emanuel Faber, I know that you know him personally, the former chief executive of Danone, who was fired after institutional investors accused him of, how did they put it, placing too much emphasis on the S and E of ESG, so turning Danone into a socially and environmentally responsible company, and not enough emphasis on the G, creating shareholder value. Talking about socially responsible companies, another misconception, quite common, I think, is that purpose is the same as corporate social responsibility, CSR. It is not. I mean, companies engage in CSR for all kinds of reasons, and very often instrumental reasons, for example, to get taxes down or to beef up their reputation, and sometimes even to deflect from their own misdeeds. Jeff Skilling and Kenneth Lay, the chairman and CEO of Enron, donated tens of millions of dollars every year to support charitable causes, while at the same time engaging in the biggest accounting fraud in history. And they insisted that Enron create a dedicated CSR department so that the company could monetize its flawed green energy model. So engagement in CSR has very little to do with purpose, right? Especially if it's done for purely instrumental reasons, and this is what most companies do, and if senior executives don't walk the talk. By the way, this is also one of the reasons why purpose should not be confused with mission statements, and company core values and BS. Now, a question to you. Does anyone know what Volkswagen's core values are or were at the time of the emissions cheating scandal? Does anyone have an idea? Okay, then I'll share it. You will not believe it, but Volkswagen's core values are social responsibility, sustainability, and the spirit of partnership. And the mission statement says, sorry, that's a bit difficult to read. Volkswagen is more than an employer. We are responsible for people, the economy, society, and the environment. And it ends with the phrase, integrity is at the heart of everything we do. Well, it's hard not to become a cynic when you read this. But Volkswagen is not an isolated case. It's not an exception, right? As we all know, there's a lot of window dressing, greenwashing out there. I think now it's called SDG washing. But at the same time, it's clear that there are organizations that walk the talk when it comes to sustainability and social responsibility. Obviously, in the non-profit sector, social ventures, NGOs, they are almost per definition purpose-driven, but also profit companies. And we talked about some of these companies like Unilever, Patagonia, or Novo Nordisk, the world leader in diabetes care and the company that consistently is ranked among the most sustainable companies in the world. And this leads me to my last or second last point. Now, the examples that I just shared with you seem to suggest that purpose-driven companies are more likely to found in some sectors and industries than in others. And there's certainly a grain of truth in it. Obviously, it's much easier to come up, with an inspiring mission like save people's lives from a pharmaceutical company than for a mining company or a construction company or a plastics producer, right? That's fairly obvious. But even in problem industries, there are now some truly remarkable success stories of companies that have completely redefined the purpose and integrated their new purpose into their business model. One example is Neste. Have any of you heard of Neste, the Finnish oil refining firm that for decades operated a business almost exclusively focused on crude oil and then redefined its purpose and its business model and became one of the pioneers in the renewable energy sector? Or one last example that I want to share with you, closer to home, is Greiner AG. How many of you have heard of Greiner? Okay, that's maybe less than a third here. Greiner is a producer of plastic and foam solutions, so not the most sexy industry to be in, and certainly not one of the most sustainable ones. So you would think that turning a company like Greiner into a purpose-driven organization is an almost impossible task, but Greiner, under its former CEO, Axel Kühner, embarked on a truly remarkable transformation journey. Now, I can't get into detail. If you're interested in it, I'm currently working on a case study on it. But once top management had realized that adopting a circular business model could be a main engine for future growth, they decided that Greiner's future purpose should be to become circular and to develop fully reusable, recyclable, and compostable products that would help reduce plastics consumption. And then they invested heavily in innovation to achieve that goal, which is what they have done. They are one of the world leaders in this area. Which leads me to my last point. Do I have 2 more minutes? Okay, great. And that is the notion that the purpose of an organization does not or should not change, right? That was advanced by some of the leading management thinkers in the world 20 years ago, 30 years ago, including Collins and Porras in their books Good to Great, Built to Last, two of the best-selling business books of all time. Most of you are too young to have read these books, probably. But that was basically the common wisdom until 20 years ago. I don't think that's true in today's world, right? In the world we live in, a world characterized by volatility and disruption, rapid technological changes, and pressing global challenges like climate change. In such an environment, companies, I think, across industry will have to rethink their core purpose and in many cases transform their business models to become more sustainable. Because otherwise they will be extinct in a few years' time. They will no longer exist, right? And I shared with you some remarkable stories of companies that are in the middle of this journey, like Greiner or Neste, that transformed from being a source of global problems like climate change to becoming part of the solution of these problems. And purpose is at the very heart of these transformation success stories. Which brings me back to the theme of this evening, how to develop a successful purpose-driven organization, and our distinguished panel of speakers. Thank you for joining us this evening, and I'm looking forward to a thought-provoking debate. Wendy, over to you. Thank you.
Welcome. So we've got some very interesting speakers for you to discuss the notion of purpose and profits. On our panel tonight, we have Professor Blanche Segrestin, Professor of Management Sciences at Means, Paris, PSL University, and member of the mission committees of the purpose-driven companies Mirova and Maif. Blanche Segrestin holds the chair in Theory, Enterprise, Models of Governance and Collective Creation. Her research focuses on the modern enterprise, its creative power, and implications for corporate governance and corporate law. She's co-author of several award-winning research books, including Réforme de l'entreprise, 2012. So I would like to invite Blanche to the stage. Our second panelist of this evening is Professor Christof Miska. He's an associate professor at the Institute of Responsibility and Sustainability in Global Business. And he directs the Competence Center for Emerging Markets in Central and Eastern Europe at Vienna University of Economics and Business. His studies responsible leadership, culture, institutions, and sustainable development. And one of his current research themes is corporate purpose. So I'd like to invite you to the stage, Christof. So, where do we start with this interesting topic? I think Günter has raised some very, very interesting questions here in terms of what is purpose and actually what does that mean in an authentic way? How is purpose developed? And how can it lead to that future direction and future success and survival of a company? So I'm going to start with an opening question to Blanche. So, given your work and a lot of your research, but also your experience with mission boards, with companies in France, how can these new legal forms help support purpose and profit in these organizations?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Can you hear me well? Yeah. I'm not very used to this kind of microphone, and sorry also for my English that is so better. So yeah, just to say one word from where I speak. So I am professor at École des Mines, as you said. It's an engineering school, but in a research lab more in social science, in management science. And I created a chair with the support of several companies 10 years ago now, in 2015, about the new forms of governance for responsibility, in a sense. Today we are two co-organizers of this chair with Kevin Levillain, and we are entering a new cycle of this research program. When we started this program in 2015, we were already proposing a new, legal form for a purpose-driven company. I will present it shortly. And what is quite magical for a researcher, this proposal has become true because it was passed in law in 2019. And since 2020, we have created with a whole team of researchers an observatory of this new adopted corporate form. Today, there are more than 1,700 companies that have adopted this form. So maybe I will just try to first explain what it is, this corporate form, before going into more detail about how it works, and especially how the governance has changed with some examples. So to give you just an overview of what it is, so I'm sorry, I think it's not the same shape that it used to be, but I think the Mac can... Never mind. First of all, yeah. Of course, the French corporate form does not come in a vacuum. There are already a lot of new corporate forms, especially in the US, with what you have probably heard about, the benefit corporation. But we have to have... there are some commonalities, but also important differences between both. In France, the idea was to say you do not register as the Société à Mission, the name of these companies. Société à Mission means a purpose-driven corporation. Because you are already a corporation, you could be a cooperative, a listed company or not, private, whatever the form of your companies, you can adopt an additional feature, becoming a mission. And it means that you enshrine in your corporate bylaw, in a corporate constitution, in a sense, the purpose that go beyond profit. You do not renounce to profit. And the law says that you have to specify beyond this broad purpose also some social and environmental objectives that you will have to commit to. So it's the same idea from the benefit corporation, this idea of formalizing in the bylaws some social and environmental ambition. But then there is one big difference with the benefit corporation. I don't know if you know this model, but the benefit corporation are assumed to pursue a general public benefit, which means material positive impact on society and environmental taken as a whole. And then there is one obligation, is that you have to report when you are a benefit corporation, to assess and to report on your impact. You have to follow a third independent party assessment to assess the impact of your activity on social and environmental issues. So that's the basic element of the benefit corporation, and there are some differences between the states. But in the French system, it's quite different because you have to define your own specific purpose. For instance, Danone, the purpose is to provide health through food, and then there are some detailed social and environmental objectives. So it's really related to what you choose to pursue as a purpose. But then there is a very different type of governance of this purpose. The idea is to say, beside the board of directors, who give the strategic orientation, you have to introduce a new board with at least one employee, and the law says very little about that, but they say this board will be in charge of evaluating whether the management of the purpose is respecting the commitment. and the law says the board, this mission committee, will conduct any verification it deems appropriate, and it can access any document it thinks necessary to verify that the purpose is verified. So it has a very broad investigative power within the company. And it has to make a report to the General Assembly, and in addition to that, there is also a third-party external audit every 2 years. So that's the idea. If you are committed to a purpose, then there must be some kind of accountability with a special board inside. So that was the general, and maybe I can very briefly, don't hesitate to, explain why this framework and why a legal form, because Günter was completely true and right to say that, in a sense, this form we have already experimented before the law. So we don't really need a law. Any company have the freedom already to specify in its bylaws some purpose, and the governance can be also freely defined by the company. So we don't really need a law to introduce this kind of governance. The important reasoning, well, to put it quite simply, I think the first argument to say, exactly as Günter has said, there are growing expectations regarding cooperation today, especially because we know that today's companies are the locus of innovation that will probably make the big, important breakthrough for achieving sustainable world tomorrow. So we are really relying also on and expect that companies commit to social and environmental issues. And of course, a lot of companies today also see, do you hear me? Yeah. That purpose is also a lever of motivation for the stakeholders and a lever of efficiency and profitability. But at the same time, there are also some situations where the two objectives, profit and social and environmental issues, are conflicting and trade-off. That's clear. And for us, the point was what we observed is that many companies were truly engaged in purpose, but the purpose were in the classical corporate framework, not protected by law. It means that when the founder is moving or leaving the company, or if new capital investors coming in, nothing in the corporate frameworks where the shareholders have the control rights and appoint the board of directors and potentially revoke them or dismiss them, nothing prevents them to change the purpose in the long run. So in a sense, there is no way that a company can protect. It's always the purpose, we said, is contingent to the future shareholders' willingness to pursue this purpose or not. So there is kind of a huge precarity that a lot of investors, but also entrepreneurs, have experienced clearly. So the idea is to say, well, of course, the corporation, today when you start a large register a corporation, you have the possibility to follow very large or various purposes. But at the same time, you have to keep in mind that the law is asymmetrical, and that if the future shareholders, and you probably don't know who the future shareholders of your corporation will be, it's not protected. The idea was first to give some protection for employees, to give also credibility in the long run to purpose. But the second idea, which probably is more specific to the French situation compared to the US, was also the idea of more fundamental idea about what is management in a corporation. And it's quite strange when you think about that if you look at the corporate law is quite silent about what does it mean to manage well a corporation. In a sense, corporate law says that directors have a huge leeway, and no one can, it's very hard to contest the legitimacy of a business decision or a board of directors decision. Because it's, in American, they say, it's a business judgment rule. The judge cannot say whether it was a good decision or not, so it's not necessary to go to the court to discuss a managerial decision. But the only one who can influence the board of directors is, of course, the shareholders. So for us, what was important is that the corporate law is silent, and it's very hard to contest a decision, even if we know, like in Volkswagen, or that it destroys the planet or it introduces inequalities. So how can we today consider that a company with a very huge impact on the planet is free to manage that as it wants, and perhaps to pursue the interest of the shareholders or whoever it serves? So is there not a way to make management decisions accountable? That was a basic question, in a sense. If you have in mind, for instance, in other branch of law, for instance, in labor law, the employers are responsible, and there are some clear ideas. You cannot organize a working process without taking into account the security. And if you are not with the state of the art of the security procedures, you can be guilty of organizing the process without securing. So what about? So it means that you need to be competent in terms of the state of the art of what is going on. So why not extending this approach? And the basic idea of the French law, and what has been convincing for the legislators, was to say, if managers are designing through their activities like artificial intelligence or the future of our world, they should at least be accountable to what they are designing for our futures. So let's give the possibility to the company to set by itself what kind of purpose it wants to commit to, but then the managers should be accountable to that, and the decision of the managers should be challengeable by the different third parties. Is it relevant or not compared to the purpose that you have? So that's the idea, and the basic idea is to say, reintroducing the role and the competencies and the status of management within corporate law, and not considering that it's only who are those on the board that could say. So sorry if I'm a bit long. And importantly, what was, I think, convincing for the legislator, so it was, in a sense, it restored freedom of enterprise. It's open, it's first protect the purpose, you can then choose your own purpose. The state is not necessarily, or any third party are not necessarily in a good way to say what should be done or not for the transition. So let any company set its own purpose, but then be really accountable to that. And then you protect also the purpose from being reduced or narrowed to the simple profit when the shareholders are changing. So just to give you some examples, sorry, the slides are awful, but it's not the first, but at least you have the element. So today, as I said, there are 1,700 companies that have adopted, and from very, so it's, of course, it's 4 years only, so it's a small number, but growing. What is interesting is that it's really very different sectors, so I will give you just some examples. What we find is, for instance, companies, family enterprise, or companies that are opening their capital to new investors, like, for instance, business school, EM Lyon. It decided to become Société à Mission when it welcomed, in a sense, new investors, private investors, to secure, in a sense, the idea of educating with all the rules for responsibility in education. You have also companies like that really face important transition. I would say, for instance, or deep tech like Sublime Energy or Open Classroom, which is a company that wants to make education accessible to all. We have also, and of course, we will probably come back to that, Danone, who is the first listed company to have adopted this new status. And as Günter suggested, you probably know that Emmanuel Faber, soon after the Danone has become Société à Mission, has been dismissed. We can discuss that later. And you have also, interestingly, some companies that are not listed company, but company from the social enterprise or social and economy. For instance, Maif is a mutual company. and in vivo also. And 10 days ago, there was a report for the government suggesting that all the press company, medias, and should become société à mission, because it's also a way to protect the independence of media, in a sense. Even if you have private capital investors, you can consider that you want to stick to this idea of independent journalism. So here are a few examples. Just to go more into detail, for instance, at Danone, it's a bit old, I should have updated the slide, but you have here the broad purpose, bringing health through food to as many people as possible, and you see that there are 4 quite detailed objectives that are in the bylaws. The first one, for instance, it's healthier products with brands encouraging better nutritional choices. You have the second one about regenerative agriculture and packaging. The last one is about also the partner in the ecosystem. So you see, it's still broad, but it's going to more details and can be then more discussed, challenged, controlled in a sense, because the first line is too broad in a sense to be controllable. And what I would like to emphasize is the profiles of the people at the mission committee, so the board who is in charge of controlling whether the management decisions are in line or not with these objectives. So Pascal Lamy, the former head of World Trade Organization, is the chairman of the mission company. And then you have a different person that we could say, and probably it was part of the, well, I will discuss that later because I will be too long. But people from really worldwide profiled with huge experience, either in unions or in nutrition. Another example I'm more aware of and more familiar with is Mirova. Mirova is an institutional investor, so it's a subsidiary of a big, large bank in France. An institutional investor, very responsible and oriented toward responsible investment. And so I put also their commitment there. So I am part of the member of the mission committee, so that's why I know quite well what is happening inside. And the last example, and then I can go into detail more about some examples. Sorry again for the slide, is La Maif, where I am also sitting on the board, together with other professors from Sciences Po. Nicole Nota, who is the chairman of this committee, is the former head of a union, labor union in France, the CFDT, and she has also created an agency, extra financial scoring agency. I don't know exactly how you say that, but VGO. So maybe just a few words, short? Okay. But we can go more into details on that in the discussion. But for me, what is really interesting here is how the role of the mission committee is challenging and discussing management decision. And what is interesting is that it's neither a stakeholder panel, because it does not necessarily represent the stakeholders, nor is it a kind of independent auditor that will check whether you have the KPIs that are performing well. It's an internal board, in a sense, which is able then to have broad investigation within the companies, but can really challenge also each management decision. So, but yeah, if I may give you one example, there are a lot of critics regarding this Société à Mission, and some people say it's the members of this board are chosen and appointed by the board of directors, so it's a kind of internal choice, so is it not a kind of greenwashing still? And for me, what is interesting is very often in this 3 cases, clearly, the mission committee has changed the way to evaluate, to assess whether the company were in line with the commitment. It means that the first year, Danone has provided a set of KPIs look at that. We are quite good in progressing in our indicators. But the mission committee, for the first years, said, and it's written in the report, we want to develop our own set of indicators because we want also to address what is probably not in the lamppost that you want to have. We want also to be sure that your activity is not has not negative aspect on the other side and respect everywhere this aspect. So they have been giving and asking for new data to assess the quality of management.
Thank you.
I will be back
Thank
later.
you very
Sorry
much.
if I was long. Sorry.
So, from Blanche's presentation, we've heard that there's a lot of tensions potentially, that there's a lot of tensions between long-term, short-term, new shareholders, redirecting. You could argue that there could be profit versus purpose or kind of individual kind of pet projects coming in. I'm going to ask Christof, because you've done a lot of work on this. By engaging in purpose and doing it properly, it's not an easy thing to do, is it? There's a lot of different tensions that need to be thought through when going down this pathway to become properly purpose-driven. So, Christof, would you like to kind of...
Yeah, that's a very tough one because although I've read a lot about purpose, I've analyzed I don't know how many purpose statements of companies. In our research, we're analyzing the Fortune 100 companies. I don't know what purpose is, ultimately. And I think this also explains why we have France with a dedicated law to that, why also across Europe we have similar developments. When in the US, we always end up having a discussion about purpose that ultimately is a discussion about shareholder primacy. So this shows how fundamental this question is. What is the purpose of a business? What is the purpose of a company? That it touches upon so many different aspects. And I'm trying to make sense out of this. And by the way, sense-making is also one component of purpose. We identified 4 broad themes in the literature, which are identity, objectives, performance, and change. Just briefly, identity, who am I in a company? What is that company doing? And this could align or could not align. They would start talking about tension. So if I work for a company that says that they have a mission and I really believe in that mission, but then there is no walk in the talk and it's sort of window dressing or, as Günter said, SDG dressing, I'm not going to be happy there most likely. Objectives is, what are we trying to achieve? Is it that we're talking about a profit-oriented company that per law has to have profits? If we think of listed companies, is it an NGO that might have a very different objective? So this is where all the legal forms, the corporate forms come in and to some degree predetermine that. But people might not be happy with that and then try to change that for some reason. I think this is what you have been discussing a lot there. Performance. How do we define success? Is it money? Is it work-life balance? Is it profits? Is it market share? So there's a huge facet of potential targets. And again, my own personal targets might not align with preset targets because I might be looking for a very fulfilling position in a company, but ultimately it's hire and fire or just earning as much money as possible. And change is a very interesting theme because it relates to how companies are able to deal with a changing environment. And this affects any company, and there might be resistance or there might be innovation or any approaches to tackle that. So I think this explains why, first of all, we don't really have a clear-cut definition of purpose, why everybody has a different understanding, and also why it's important to all of us, and I assume many of you are being here today because you feel there is something in there. And also it explains why there is a lot of tensions that you were touching upon. And I've prepared a brief overview from our work, and I need this because I don't recall all of these potential tensions that we identified, and credits here really go also to co-authors, Natanja Chua, Johanna Meyer, and Günter Stahl, who were involved in this work. We identified opposing poles in the various literatures, and this is also what we see in our empirical work. For example, individual versus collective, that is the first one, the property dimension, where I might just be looking for a sensible job or trying to make as much money as possible working for a company, but this might not align with a company's idea of purpose when they try to tackle the world's pressing problems. Ideally, and this is also why this is interesting, it's what we call alignment. Bringing together those opposing poles is where we start talking about implementation of purpose. This is work, and this needs to be done and understood. So it doesn't just work as having a mission statement, a purpose statement. We say, that's what we do now, and everybody follows that. It's really bringing people on board doing that. Yeah. I just want to touch upon one other one there that I find very interesting, and that is the second one, the scope, universal versus contextual. Very prone for international companies. So if headquarters decides, so that's our new purpose statement, we try to be very socially responsible. And then we look at that exact same purpose statement in a subsidiary country, in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, that social has a very different understanding and dimension just because of the local challenges there. So we might be talking about the same idea, but how that is enacted is a very different one. And this is also where you might see tensions, on the one hand, but if you draw from that, you can also think of what do we do? How do we develop as a company? What does this mean for identity, objectives, performance, and change?
So what you're arguing is that tension is sometimes necessary for change to happen.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why we're discussing this topic here.
Yeah.
Just the fact that we're asking, what is the purpose of a for-profit-oriented company? There's something wrong there, because it's to generate profits. And I think the reason why we ask the purpose question is, how do we go there? How do we generate those profits?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And this is a perfect time to introduce our next panel speaker, who is Lothar Wenzel. He's a systemic organizational consultant for profound transformation and processes that create beautiful and successful organizations. So Lothar is managing director and partner at Train Consulting and an author of the book Rules of the Management Game in 2015, along with numerous industry articles. So he's got years of leadership experience, but Lothar now works with businesses across Austria, across Europe, working with them to understand their purpose, but also to actually transform into organizations that really, truly use purpose to create profit. So Lothar, can I invite you onto the stage?
Hello. Hello. Hi.
Hi. So Lothar, you've got lots of experience in this field, and you actually work with people that are struggling with these tensions. So what is it that you do? What do you, when you go into a company and they're saying, Lothar, we're struggling, we don't know what we're here for, or we want to change. What needs to change to actually really embed purpose within the organization so we get the, what Günter was talking about, that meaningfulness within organizations, where there's an alignment, as Christof was saying, but also in terms of how what Blanche was talking about, so managers are held accountable for what they do. So what do you do when you go into a company?
It's a good question. A question I always ask myself, because it's, and it's a bit every time we enter a new company, it's a new kind of adventure going in, because all the tensions and the problems that organizations today face, and to us, only organizations come that have problems, because otherwise they would not need deep down transformation. So pattern change, beliefs change. So it's always problems, and it's also they seem to be very alike, they're all very different. And what we do is, in the first hand, we create space and safe spaces for those leaders to being able to talk about those tensions, to even getting aware of those tensions, or the conflicts, or the problems, or the environment they're working in, with all the things that you have said, profit versus purpose, which is crazy to think about that, huh? Profit versus purpose, individuality, or individual versus collective, which doesn't exist, because there is no such thing than the individual not connected to anything else. So what we do is provide a space where those tensions, contradictions, problems can be discussed about. Together at the table, in small groups or in even bigger groups, in large groups, maybe with 500 managers in one room. Wow. The best way to do change in my eyes, because it's real-time change. Coming back to that later, probably. But it's pretty much down to that. And I was come back from a company at the moment where the purpose, the positive purpose, a positive mission, is inbuilt, embodied in the organization itself. So people don't have to ask themselves, why are we doing this work? Because they know. It's a food supplier, wholesale food supplier. No one in that company struggles with the purpose because they know what they have to do.
How did they get to that point? Were they born with purpose? Or was it something that's evolved because of leadership? How do you see that?
I'm very much convinced, and we also see this in our work, and nearly all studies underline that people own what they help to create.
Okay.
People own what they were part of, and people are on board when they are seen, and when they help to create what this organization is doing. Even in change processes, even more important, because change means to very often radically change from one state into another one. Meaning we need to change the habits, the patterns we have created in order to do the old business. While we are doing the old business, we need to go to change. And that's why people need to be taken on board, but we cannot take them on board because responsibility cannot be given.
Yeah.
It can only be taken.
Trust
can only be given.
Yeah.
And cannot be taken. So this is what we are working with them. So we try to create spaces, to create roadmaps, to create communication processes, dialogue processes where people have a say in what is to be created for the future. And in that company, and this was the question you asked, people have been on board, have been creating that together. And in these 3 days, we had this experience because there's a big problem there. For the first time, they are not profitable enough.
So the tension's coming in.
No bonus will be granted this year to the people, so it's a hard situation, and they are not used to it. And at the same time, the top management, not even with our help, they knew that. The top management put that into the room in front of 40 managers. This is the situation. Let's deal with it. Let's deal with it together. And this is the way forward, I guess. People are taking seriously and treated as adults. There are a lot of young people here, and they are adults because they know their way around.
So what do you see as the future of organizations and purpose? Being on the ground, working with a lot of different organizations, what do you see as the direction of travel? Because in our input, we had Günter talking about purpose washing.
I'm sorry, I've missed that. Please tell me later, please. Yeah.
So purpose washing, and there are several examples where the website and the words look absolutely fabulous. You'd think they're the most sustainable and responsible company in the world, but the reality was something very, very different. Great. So For companies that really do take this seriously, what do you see as the kind of future direction? Because actually, purpose is a buzzword, and it's something that Günter said, and it's been used a lot, means different things to different people. And often with these kinds of words, it loses its meaning. It becomes something vague, and people then, its legitimacy starts to ebb away because, well, on purpose. Oof. Yeah. So what do you see? What's the direction of travel?
I hardly anymore talk about purpose, because it's like in former times, CSR has become a buzzword, and it's very important, whatever, but the content is very important, I'm very sure. So your question was, what do I see? And my hope and what I see comes together. But what I see is, and what I predict is that within the course of the next 10 years, no organization will be able to attract the best people who do not really live a positive purpose, or we call it being a beautiful organization. And I predict that this, because the people already know when they're working in companies where the purpose is not embodied. Yeah. They know they work for different reasons than still there, but they will not do that anymore. I'm very sure. And the climate situation and all that will even foster that movement. So I think this being purposeful, meaningful, or creating beautiful organizations, as we talk about, for a better world, for me, will be the most important differentiators for organizations. So really, to attract people who really can do the work, and the work in 10 years will be even much more challenging than it is now, and it's already extremely challenging out there.
That's interesting. So purpose, what do you use beautiful organizations? You don't use the term purpose anymore.
Yeah, because purpose, and I completely understand the concept, I'm completely in line with it, but the word purpose as such has no evaluation. But beautiful is already a word that needs to be interpreted. When we say beautiful, and we use the term beautiful very often in our lives, right? But for organizations, we don't. Why? But if we use it, we, in the moment, have that question on the table. What do you mean? And this is a different story, and we need to have those dialogues about that. Beautiful, of course, and is for sure sustainably profitable at the same time as purposeful in the senses I heard. It's treating people as adults, is constantly thinking about their own belief system and if they are still right and functional for what you want to do. It's sourced from CO2 neutral suppliers, for example, all that is in there. That's what I use the term beautiful for, and profit is necessary.
I've heard you talk about that before when we did the podcast.
Yes.
That actually, when we're talking about for-profits, we can't forget this notion that actually for-profits have to be profitable. But you've got a nice way of framing that, haven't you, in terms of it's not that profit or purpose, but actually through being beautiful that you actually become successful, you adapt to your environment, you become, you know yourself, and you can kind of have a pathway into the future.
So profit is not a purpose.
Yeah.
This would be the same as if we would say breathing is a purpose for life. It's not. It's a necessity and a prerequisite, maybe not every year, hopefully, but sustainably, yes. But it's not a purpose. And people know that, feel that, and nobody is running after a company that has profit as a purpose anymore.
So, thank you. So I'm going to start opening this up, because I think you've all come from different angles. So we've got the kind of more governance and keeping managers accountable to purpose. We've got the tensions and the alignment of what purpose means, and we've got this kind of aspect of renegotiation of purpose, so that actually it's not just top management, it's the whole organization.
Hopefully, yeah.
So, from each of your perspectives, how does this line up? So, Blanche, you're talking about holding managers accountable to a purpose because of changes. How does this kind of process of renegotiation fit into what you do on the mission boards? How do you...
I think it's fit very well, actually, because I like both what you said about creating space to discuss the tension, and also, let me give you an example, because I think that really one of the drivers of the example I study is really the ability, in a sense, to face the challenge driven by the purpose, to not avoid them. And one case that I can speak about, because it's not confidential, it's La Maif, is a mutual insurance company, mutual one. And they have in one of their objectives the idea of promoting, contributing to more solidarity through their activities. And for the first years, second years of the mission committee, they were reporting about what they are doing with their employees on territories and becoming more aware about the challenges of their activity. The mission committee pointed to the fact that today with the climate change, we know that lots of different populations will become uninsurable in quite short-term perspective. So the question for us was reassessing, exactly as you said, the ideas of reinterpreting the solidarity within this context. Can you claim to promote solidarity if you have this issue of uninsurability? So, and that you will probably exclude a lot of, and how do you address that? And I think it's quite challenging for really to address this unknown situation, because they don't have the solution, but they agree to work on that. And I think this process of taking the question seriously, not making early compromise or sacrifice or trade-off, but regarding the situation honestly and rigorously exploring the possibility to work on that. And I think this process is very demanding, but potentially also very rewarding for all the team and the stakeholders. So I think it's very well fit with what you said.
Exactly, exactly. Couldn't agree more.
So what are the, if you were going to, before we open up to the floor for the last 15 minutes, I'm going to put you on the spot with a Wendy question.
Oh.
So what, if you were going to say, if you were kind of meeting with a company, what would be the critical success factors, maybe the top 3, for a company really to have purpose and profits, to live by its purpose, to be able to evolve? What would you see as the top 3 recommendations? So I'm going to start with Christof first. What would be your top 3? What should we look for in companies?
It's clarity. I think clarity is important, also relating to what you said. And I think you're drawing from positive psychology here, looking at what gives energy to organizations. So as soon as I know what works and what gives energy to me, I can also deal with the challenges that you addressed. But this only works if there is clarity what purpose is about. And that clarity throughout the organization, which is easier said than done. But bringing everybody on board and don't assuming that just a written statement would do the job, but having those conversations. So yeah, it's clarity, scope, so being widespread in the organization, and having courage, I would say. Having courage of walking that talk, of taking it seriously, and don't going away when it gets tough, but really using that.
Yep, thank you. So walk the walk, clarity, scope, and stick with it. Okay, thank you. Blanche?
It's difficult. Maybe I will repeat myself, but I think having formalized purpose and keeping the line, so more fidelity perhaps to purpose, and also being able to navigate in the unknown. That for me it's and not avoiding
Facing
the
it,
unknown,
right,
facing the unknown. Accepting also to be challenged. Completely. One of the interviewees I have at Danone said, yes, the CEO every day feels observed and very much observed and assessed, and he accepts.
Yeah. I can see some overlaps developing.
Sure.
Lothar.
It's hard, but I try. Align, so it's also coming from what we experience out there in organizations, that what misses most for organizations is a common, aligned, or an aligned common picture on the vision, or you could even put purpose in here, which is incredibly interesting, because you would think that's what companies do. So having a picture where they want to go, what they want to be in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years time, that's for sure, for me, the most important thing, because that focuses everything you do. Second, a blend of what you said is being bold and enough courageous enough to embrace both complexity and in the same respect uncertainty, and for leaders, and let yourself be witnessed in being uncertain.
Yeah.
Would be the second. And the third, see people.
Yeah.
See humans out there in the organizations in the world.
Okay, so actually be humanistic. Yeah. Interesting. Well, thank you. So I'm going to stop hogging the panelists. I've put them on the spot. So I'm going to open up the floor. We have 15 minutes before we can go and drink wine and talk about this further. So I'd like to open it up for anybody on the floor. Do you have any questions for our panelists or for Günter? Attila. Would you like to introduce yourself first?
My name is Attila Berki. I'm a teaching and research assistant here at EU. And my question is, generally all three of you seem to agree that purpose is becoming important in organizations. What do you think is the driver behind that this is a topic now and it wasn't a topic, let's say, 200 years ago? Is it environmental change? Is it just that living standards are increasing and people
Good question.
care more about happiness and not just money? Or what do you think the reasons behind this drivers towards purpose are?
Who would like to start?
Very good question.
Well, what I can say is that if we look at the literature, which always reflects basically developments out there, it's not that new. So we're seeing first discussions about purpose in the 1960s already, but it was very much in the area of sociology, asking those big questions: why do we human beings exist? What's our purpose? We saw it a bit later on, also in the 80s. There was more on that, so it's always been there. But I think what's coming together now is that we realize that the way how we've been conducting business has certain limitations. Societal limitations, environmental limitations. This is where I'd say sustainability is a big theme, but it's not the same as purpose. We start asking what have we been doing so far because of those issues. These are drivers, I think. And the answer cannot be we need to be more sustainable. So we need to, first of all, understand what purpose is in the first place and then work with that. So my response.
Okay.
It's fine.
I think I will go with the same line. My understanding is that purpose is becoming important because we had this governance crisis. And in a sense, because we have forgotten to conceptualize, because we have a theory of the firm that speak a lot about for-profit organization, that the way we conceptualize, if you look to the manual in microeconomy, a firm is a producer which maximizes the profits. So, and probably there has been in the 70s and 80s a kind of, what could say, drift in the organization where CEOs were also taught to and educated in this idea that their roles was to serve first shareholders. And then we forgot the fact that the enterprise, modern enterprise, has emerged in the late 19th, 20th century to develop innovative capabilities and activities that become more and more influential. So today there is this mismatch in a sense where we have companies that really have a huge influence on the world, about medicine, and they produce food, they invent the world we live in, the way we communicate. So they shape the world, and at the same time, we accept that they are only for profit-oriented. This mismatch, I think, is a fundamental theoretical mismatch that needs to be realigned, and to consider that, no, there are different purposes, and we need to make it explicit to make it possible. That would be my take.
Thank you, Blanche.
My answer would be out of consciousness research, I would say, because people, we as human beings, are sense-making social systems. We need to have sense or get meaning in order to even be able to behave. And that's why we are looking for it. I agree, it's not new. It's not a new concept, but it gets more and more important as there are so many organizations out there who lack an inbuilt purpose because they do something that is not really needed in the world. So that's why so many are searching for that. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Very good question. Any other questions, please?
My name is Anastasia, and I would like to ask, how should one find the purpose either in life or in company? Like, how should you understand what do you want to do? I think that it's important that every man should have a purpose in life, and it also means that he should have purpose in his own work. Sure. So how should you find the right purpose for you? Like, I'm 17 right now, and I don't have any idea how I would like to spend my life and work, but I really like to make the world better. So I really want to know how you should find the purpose.
I think, Lothar, this is one for you.
This is for you. My daughter's, one of my two daughters, 17 as well. So I get those questions at home as well. And it's a question which has no easy answer, but what I tell them is be as curious as possible out there in the world. Try to find interest in a lot of things. Observe the world around you and observe yourself within you. What really drives you, what you want to contribute, what you like, what you love, what you dislike. And hold the tension a little bit in your age, because this can change. But be very, very much interested in the outside, in the outer and the inner world, I would say.
Do you want to go into a little bit more?
Sorry?
Do you want to expand on that a little bit more, the outer and...
Be interested in the world, what's around you. What you see is getting your interest. Where you see, wow, that's cool. This I might try out at least, or there I would like to contribute or work. What are the phenomena in the world? What is the things that you already are interested in? What news are you looking? What books are you reading? What music? All of that tells you a lot about what might be your future, maybe profession even. And then observe yourself, where you find love, where you find ease, where you find motivation, whatever that is within you. And write that down, journal that every day.
And how should companies do it then? There was a second part of the question.
Yes.
We've got the individual purpose, and then we've got company purpose, which is...
Exactly.
So how...
But does it help? At the moment, at least.
Yeah, so because at the individual level it is, as you say, being curious and kind of exploring the world and what resonates. But would you say the same for companies?
For sure. If you have a culture that helps people to stay curious, for example, to even look into their consumers and what they really want, how they live, what they do, what they dislike, not even only connected to your product. This is where the beauty lies. This is where the new business models as well lie. But this is also where the purpose lies.
I'd just like to add, I think it's brilliant you're asking this question right now at this stage of your life, because we see that question coming back as people progress in their careers when we do leadership development. So it's a question that's coming up in your 30s and 40s and 50s, and sometimes people call it midlife crisis or quarter-life crisis, but I think actually that is always searching for your own purpose. And the earlier you start, I think the better that is, because then you develop also the skills and competencies of working with you and your purpose.
Very true. I still do that over and over again.
Yeah, if I can add something, because I think the question is very relevant. I'm not at all able to answer on the individual level, but I think what is interesting in company at the collective level, because often you have an entrepreneur at the starting point of the company that have project and ambition and aspiration. But then when the company is not just an individual, but growing and getting more and more interdependent, I think I like very much the book of Chester Barnard in the 30s.
Yes.
And he was thinking about being an executive and a manager is also being able to develop a common purpose. And I think it's very interesting to say it's not the one person purpose. It's taking into account all the interdependencies and potentially the conflictual approaches divergent, but accepting, not imposing one idea to other, like imposing a project for future generation. So integrating potentiality of opening for and considering only common purpose. And then, yeah, it's
I love this book. It's one of my favorites. Read it, The Function of the Executive. Beautiful. Thank you.
Follow-up. Okay, this is the last question though, because we'll have to follow up afterwards when we finish. So.
When you're like searching for your life's purpose, I think that you shouldn't be afraid of making mistakes because it's your experience. And so sometimes people just sit at home and don't want to do anything because they're afraid of mistaking. And I think that's not how it should be. But in the way of companies, I think that it's like when you do, for example, I don't know, waste your time on something like scrolling TikTok while you could be studying, that's a mistake, of course, but it's not that bad. But when you work at the company, the mistake of the company is much more risky. So how should you, like, I don't know, how should you try something new, but at the same time, you shouldn't be afraid, no, like how should you try something new when you're afraid that you might make a mistake and it will cost you a lot?
What a beautiful first answer you already gave. The sentence before the question. Beautiful. Yeah. Come on.
What's the purpose of TikTok? To be provocative here. Right? Yeah. But I think it's very telling because this is very much about my own space and freedom, and in a corporate setting, I'm restricted. So I think if that is your impression of a company, then it might not be the right company for you. When you don't feel that you can flourish in that company context, and when you then divert it to doing other things. I know it's just an example, but I'm thinking that a bit further. So that might be an indication to find a different company, find a different context, that it is open for that. I wouldn't say that this is a mistake in a company. This is just a way of behavior. The mistake issue is another one. Does a company allow for mistakes to happen? And then what happens? Are there any consequences? Is there a learning culture or not? So I'd say that there's two different things to look at here. One is really, is that the right context for me? And the other one, what is the tolerance of mistakes on the job?
Blanche?
Yeah, just perhaps, if I understand well, your question is mistake at the collective level can be much more problematic than at the individual level because they are much more influenced. And I think it's a very important point. What I would like to say that, in a sense, the more I study management science, the more I think that management is here, the organization of the collective action is here to take this responsibility. So if you need governance, it's also because there are individual mistakes that we need to take. For instance, if you are in a pharmaceutical companies, you ask your researcher to develop new, innovative hypotheses on new direction of research. Not all will work, but the question is how collectively we make sense of all this diverging and reorganizing process. So I think what is important is that the collective take the responsibility and protect individual mistakes, make them possible, but organize the responsibility for making them sustainable collectively.
Yeah, a lot has been said. What I can say from the world I'm in, my organizations, and those are more on the problem side, of course, yeah, is that all the organizations struggle with your question. How can we allow for more mistakes and at the same time being predictable and being safe and so on? Mm-hmm. We constantly have this question, all the change processes. First answer would give the same. If you don't feel well or brave enough and safe enough to make mistakes, leave, do something else. But for organizations, it's a really key challenge at the moment to allow for mistake. And allow for mistakes doesn't mean we want mistakes, but we know that mistakes are happening constantly. That's life. Life is full of that. And how can we create a space where it can be openly shared and talked about mistakes? That's for me the big question.
It's where learning culture comes in.
Otherwise, no learning comes in.
I'm looking at the time. We were just 1 minute over. I saw lots of hands in the back. Okay. Okay. One last question, and then the people that have questions, you can ask at the when we kind of break up, because I know that some people have to leave, unless people want to stay. If you want to carry on, we can carry on. But,
my name is this particular moment, thank you very much. I am part of FEWU. I'm looking forward to be a part of Vienna University of Business and Economics, and I have a question particularly about the employees in purpose-oriented companies. So, should this purpose be shared between these employees of this particular company? And how it will affect the performance of a particular employee in this company, and should it be a kind of essential part of HR part of this company? Yeah. Thank you.
Christof, you're nodding. Lothar?
You go ahead.
As soon as it has to be shared, the problem already begins. Or is already there, because it means that it's not embodied in the organization. So it should be telling enough. So we call that stories that move us. The purpose should be so compelling, and of course need to be communicated when you enter a company, but should be so compelling that you really hook up to it, and therefore you join a company, for example. If it changes, should be created by as many as possible people in the organization, because then they are part of it. Otherwise, it might be a purpose that is only on the surface a purpose, but not really embodied in the organization. If that is an answer, I don't know.
Yeah, I can see it. One very, very quick, short question.
Günter?
Very, very quick.
Hi.
Günter?
Thank you very much for your time.
It's actually not a question, but if I may make one comment, because I was thrilled by Attila's question. There was not a lot of talk about purpose 40 years ago or 30 years ago. Why is it now? And my first reaction was to say, that would have been not the right answer. But my first reaction was, we have a bit of a luxury problem here. You're sitting here and talking about what is the purpose of an organization, fine, but we are talking about individual purpose, right? So how to make my work more meaningful? Do I have a meaningful career? If you're struggling for your life, fighting for your life, you are thirsty, you are hungry, you live in a war-torn country, you don't really have that luxury anymore. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Maslow's need pyramid that says basically if you don't have your basic needs fulfilled, you don't have to worry about all of the higher order needs. But then I thought, is that really true? When we think about Viktor Frankl's experience in concentration camp, he wrote, was he in Auschwitz? He was in one of these death camps. Yes. The only thing that made him survive was actually to find some meaning in the situation, in what he was doing. And we don't have to look at these extreme examples. If you're in an organization and you can't find some meaning in what you are doing in your work, you have to get out of it. So it's not only about you having your most basic needs fulfilled, certainly in all of our cases, or many of our cases, maybe there are some refugees here, the basic needs are fulfilled, but it's really finding some higher purpose in what you are doing. We can't live without that. That was just a very quick comment.
There was just one
Yes,
very quick.
Very briefly. So thank you very much. I had just one question. So I'm coming from the nonprofit sector, and I know how much time we invest in evaluating, do we really make impact? Or are our outcomes and outputs really worth it? And each time we're actually applying for different funding, this is our main thing. It's not about profit, it's whether we have purpose. And knowing this and knowing how hard it is for us to actually evaluate this, I have a question: how hard or easy is it actually to evaluate impact for profit organizations or companies? Just if you have any thoughts on this.
Can you repeat the question once more?
How easy or hard is it to claim for profit organizations that they actually do make impact? Do evaluators and auditors actually struggle sometimes to also conclude oh, this actually does make impact? Or even for how long do you need to make an impact? Because I come from nonprofit sector, and for us it's completely, I have a feeling it's a little bit different, so I'm just curious.
Actually, I think it's easy, or easier than in the nonprofit sector, because there's so many guidelines on various ways of reporting what impact is. So many ways of thinking of the purpose and impact the company creates, that there could always be ways to basically claim there has been impact. There is not too much auditing going on. We're now seeing first scandals also emerge because of that, because sustainability reports were audited in a way that were a bit questionable. But for now, I think it's relatively straightforward, that beyond profit there is something more. But whether or not that is actually impactful is difficult to assess. And I think this is your starting point, where you need to make the case we're having an impact beyond something else. I don't see companies yet being there, but the more we have legislation, at least in Europe, on greenwashing, on transparency, the more this might be becoming an issue as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. So rather than standing between you and refreshments, I'd like to wrap up our proceedings and by thanking our panel for a wonderful, wonderful discussion. And so thank you very much for some great questions and being here right till the end. And if any of the academics in the room want to continue this conversation, we have a think tank through the Engage program, so talk to us if you would like to be part of that think tank. But I'd like to give a round of applause to our panelists to say thank you.
Wendy.
Okay. So I do believe that the drinks, are they outside? Oh, at the back. Hello. So there's refreshments for you. We can continue the conversation. So thank you very much for coming. And good night.
Thank you.